Close your eyes. Imagine you're on a flight. The cabin lights are dim. Most passengers are asleep. Some are watching movies. Others are dreaming about the people waiting for them at home. To everyone on board, this feels like just another ordinary flight. But in less than an hour, every life on this airplane will become part of one of the greatest mysteries in modern history.
239 people. One airplane. No answer.
More than 10 years have passed, yet the world still cannot answer one simple question. What really happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370?
It was Saturday, March 8th, at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was preparing for what should have been a completely routine journey. The destination? Beijing, China. Flight time? Around 6 hours. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Just another overnight flight. At exactly 12:41 a.m. local time, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The aircraft was a Boeing 777-200ER, one of the safest long-haul airplanes ever built. The pilots were highly experienced, the weather was calm, the aircraft showed no reported technical problems before departure. If you had watched it take off, you would have seen nothing unusual. Just another flight disappearing into the night sky. The planned journey was simple. Depart Kuala Lumpur, climb to cruising altitude, cross the South China Sea, enter Vietnamese airspace, then continue toward Beijing. It was a route flown countless times before. Less than 40 minutes after takeoff, Flight MH370 approached the point where Malaysian air traffic control would hand the aircraft over to Vietnamese controllers. This was completely routine. It happened on thousands of flights, every single day. Then, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah made what would become the final confirmed radio transmission from the aircraft.
370 contact Ho Chi Minh, 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysia 370.
Just 7 simple words. Calm, professional, completely ordinary. No sign of panic, no emergency call, no indication that anything was wrong. And then something happened. Something so unexpected that it would confuse investigators for years. Less than 2 minutes after that final radio message, the aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. To air traffic controllers, it was as if the airplane had suddenly disappeared from their screens. Not exploded, not crashed, just gone. When Flight MH370 disappeared from civilian radar,
Most people assumed the airplane had simply crashed into the South China Sea. It seemed like the only logical explanation. But investigators were about to discover, unlike civilian radar, military radar doesn't depend on an aircraft's transponder. It can detect a large aircraft simply by reflecting radio waves off its body. That difference would completely change the investigation. That the real story had only just begun. As investigators reviewed military radar recordings, they noticed something astonishing. Flight MH370 hadn't continued toward Beijing. It had turned around. Think about that for a moment. Hundreds of people believed this flight was heading toward China. But in reality, the airplane was now flying back across the Malaysian peninsula. And almost no one knew. No distress call, no emergency message, no explanation. Just silence. Military radar indicated that the aircraft continued flying west, crossing back over Malaysia, and then heading toward the Andaman Sea. This wasn't a random movement. It appeared controlled. Then, military radar lost the aircraft too. After that point, there would be no confirmed radar tracking. Once again, Flight MH370 vanished into darkness. Deliberate. Yet investigators still didn't know who was controlling the aircraft or why. At this point, investigators had almost nothing left. No radar, no radio calls, no emergency signal. It should have been impossible to find the airplane. But thousands of miles above Earth, an invisible satellite had been quietly listening all along. By now, Flight MH370 had vanished from radar. No radio calls, no distress signal, no confirmed location. To investigators, it seemed as though the airplane had simply disappeared. But while everyone on Earth was searching the skies, something in space had been quietly recording clues all along. The aircraft's transponder had stopped, but another system continued working. Not because anyone turned it on, but because it was designed to do one simple job: stay connected. Every hour, the aircraft automatically exchanged tiny electronic signals with an Inmarsat communication satellite. These weren't voice calls. They weren't GPS coordinates. They were simple electronic handshakes, proving that the aircraft was still there. Imagine receiving a phone call, but hearing only silence. You don't know where the caller is. You don't know what happened. But you know someone is still on the other end. That's essentially what investigators had. Tiny electronic whispers from an aircraft no one could find. Engineers began studying those satellite handshakes, not just whether they happened, but when they happened, and how the radio signals behaved. It was painstaking work. After weeks of analysis, investigators reached a conclusion that changed the entire search. Instead, The evidence suggested the aircraft had continued flying for several more hours, far into the southern Indian Ocean. Think about that. While families hoped the airplane would appear somewhere, investigators now believed it had crossed one of the most remote regions on Earth. A place where finding a single aircraft would be like finding a needle in an ocean. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became more than a year. Search aircraft crossed thousands of miles. Ships scanned the ocean floor again and again and again. Yet, there was still no airplane. Families refused to stop hoping. Every new report, every rumor, every possible sighting brought the same question. Could this finally be the breakthrough? But each time, hope faded once again. Then, on July 29th, 2015, nearly 16 months after Flight MH370 disappeared, something extraordinary happened. On the remote island of Reunion, in the Indian Ocean, a large piece of aircraft debris washed ashore.
Experts immediately recognized the object. It was a flaperon, a movable section of an aircraft wing. Unlike many other aircraft parts, a flaperon carries unique identification markings. The result changed everything. Those markings allowed investigators to trace its origin.
French investigators concluded that the flaperon came from Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. For the families, this was heartbreaking. It confirmed that the aircraft had not simply disappeared. At least part of it had reached the ocean. Over the following months, more pieces of debris were discovered on beaches along the western Indian Ocean. Some were confirmed to be from MH370. Others were considered highly likely. Ocean current studies showed that drifting wreckage from the southern Indian Ocean could eventually reach these distant shores. But despite these discoveries, investigators still face the same impossible question. If pieces of the aircraft had reached shore, then where was the rest of the airplane? And more importantly, what had happened during those final hours? After years of investigation, thousands of pages of technical reports, and one of the largest search operations in aviation history, investigators still could not answer one question with certainty. Why did Flight MH370 change course? One possibility investigators considered was deliberate human action. This idea was based on several known facts. The aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. The aircraft changed direction, and it continued flying for several more hours. Those actions appeared controlled. However, no publicly released evidence has conclusively identified who was responsible or exactly what happened inside the cockpit. Another possibility was a catastrophic systems failure. Could a fire, decompression, or electrical failure have disabled the crew? Investigators carefully examined these possibilities. But no single mechanical explanation fully matched all of the known evidence. Hijacking was also investigated. Passenger backgrounds, crew histories, airport security, and intelligence information were all reviewed. While investigators explored this possibility, no publicly confirmed evidence established that a hijacking had occurred. Over the years, countless theories spread across the internet. Secret military operations, hidden landings, alien encounters. Extraordinary claims captured millions of views. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And to this day, no credible evidence has verified those stories.
For the families, the greatest mystery was never about satellites or radar. It was about people. Mothers, fathers, children, friends, waiting for answers that never fully came.
More than a decade has passed, yet somewhere beneath these waters, a story remains unfinished. An aircraft carrying 239 people disappeared into history. But for the families, time never truly moved on. MH370 didn't just become an aviation mystery. It changed how the world thinks about flight. Airlines, investigators, engineers, and governments all began asking the same question. How could a modern airliner simply disappear? The search for MH370 pushed new conversations about aircraft tracking, satellite communications, and global flight safety. It reminded the world that even in an age of advanced technology, there are still limits to what we know. For investigators, MH370 became one of the most challenging investigations in aviation history. For scientists, it became a lesson in persistence. For families, it became a lifetime of unanswered questions. And for the rest of us, it became a reminder that every flight carries more than passengers. It carries dreams, memories, and people waiting to come home. Official investigations have provided important evidence, but they have not answered every question. As of today, the exact cause of Flight MH370's disappearance has not been conclusively determined. That uncertainty is what keeps this story alive. If one day the remaining wreckage is found, perhaps the final chapter of MH370 will finally be written. Until then, it remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the history of aviation. If you enjoy well-researched documentaries based on real events, consider subscribing to Hidden Chronicles. Every week, we uncover the stories, the mysteries, and the moments that changed our world. Because sometimes, the truth is even more fascinating than fiction.